So, Lani, plant-based medicines are part of Indigenous cultures worldwide, used as medicines in ceremonies for, rites of passage and to facilitate mystical or spiritual experiences. Whereas in Western cultures, the use of psychedelic plants and also synthetic manufactured medicines are associated with just sort of like, partying and sort of like counterculture and of course are illegal. But I'm just wondering if you can tell us something about the wisdom, the rituals and healing properties of plant-based medicines to give us a more balanced and nuanced understanding of the potential for these medicines to assist with healing from trauma.
Absolutely. Big, nuanced question. I guess from my experience, I'm part of the ayahuasca vegetalista lineage, and I've had that first-hand experience working with master plants and ayahuasca from a very ceremonial and ritualized perspective. And I find what's most healing about that is that there's a whole culture and community involved in the process. So these medicines are passed down through lineage, through people that are trained, their entire life to understand the medicines, the properties and personalities of the plants, and how to hold that container through shamanic altered states of consciousness, through wisdom traditions. And also the community is speaking a similar language. There's more, I guess, an inbuilt integration already in the community because it's part of the culture and the practices. And, there's the deep symbiosis with the plants and with the music and the teachings. So it's very different from a recreational sense of taking substances, because there is that cultural and spiritual container. And with that, I guess, responsibility and expectations and, a seriousness to it as well. It's not necessarily done for fun. People are doing this for, healing properties as well as physical conditions. A lot of people in the jungle drink ayahuasca, for example, if they've got physical complaints, not just psychosocial and spiritual. So it's a way of life, and it's very much embedded in the fabric of the community. Okay. But I did, if it's okay, Naomi, I just wanted to dispel, I guess, some myth that's out there that, the recreational scene doesn't have intention. Because what I'm finding now in the harm reduction space, the more that you talk to these communities in Australia, is that a lot of people are drawing on other cultures. They're drawing from, shamanism, from different plant medicine communities, as well as intentional, creativity and visionary medicine. So we're finding that even young people are getting far more educated and aware of how these medicines can be taken as a way to support healing and growth, as opposed to escape pain and perpetuate harm. So I'm definitely seeing a huge movement in Australia around intentional recreational use for the purpose of post-traumatic growth.
I think that's like an interesting, distinction, the difference between escaping pain and really trying to find a way to, address it and heal it. And it's fabulous to hear that there is a growing, I guess, more understanding and respect of these medicines, which I think that when we go back sort of like over maybe previous decades where they came out on the scene and they were sort of like just, party drugs, it sounds like the tide is sort of like changing around that kind of approach to these, very powerful medicines. So psychedelics are very powerful medications, and as with any medication, some people may have adverse effects and impacts. And in the context of this workshop of exploring trauma, spirituality, and healing. What are the risks of a transcendent and spiritual experience at some period becoming or moving towards perhaps becoming more of a, a psychosis, or if it's not that extreme, what may have been termed in the past as like just, a bad trip. And how, as Australia moves towards psychedelic therapies becoming available for certain mental health issues, can potential harms be minimised, with these medicines?
Yeah, absolutely. What we know from the research and from the literature, if there is a safe preparation, dose and integration, it's extremely rare for there to be psychosis. So I just really want to challenge that myth. We know that many of these medicines, particularly MDMA and psilocybin, are very safe when they're done in the right conditions, and that's why they've been approved by the TGA, because there's minimal risk of psychosis. However, what I know from my own work and supporting many clients in the harm reduction space and now in some dose sessions is that preparation is everything. Because what can happen is if people are not aware of how deep the medicine can take them, there can be psychic ruptures, there can be deep ontological shock, there can be flipping into parts that they weren't aware of that were exiled, and the medicine can bypass protectors and really rip up exiles into consciousness and into life. And if people aren't aware and supported of that, it can be a lot to navigate. So when I work with people, I think it's really important to help them to understand that the medicine is multifaceted. It can be literal. You can get a literal memory, literal information. You can experience myth and legend and archetypes. You can experience a different, animal consciousness, people, countries, belief systems. You can shape shift into, anything really. That's a rich tapestry of experiences. And in order to be ready for that, people do need to have a sense of self to come back to. This is where it can be, more risky if there's a lot of fragmentation. And as we say, in order to dissolve your ego, you actually need to have an ego to return to and a home that can support you, a safe home, relative stability in your relationships, at least a couple of people that are secure attachments around you. Because, to dissolve yourself and then open up into that transpersonal field, and then to decipher what was real, what is literal, what do I need to embody and implement in my life, and what was fantasy, what was play, what is something that I can just take as a a message to be creative with, as opposed to a literal action. And it takes a lot of metacognitive intelligence to hold that, and to be able to work with that through other contemplative practices. And that's why it should never just be psychedelics. It should be therapy, yoga, art, music. All of these other medicines that we have available need to be brought into the container to help the self integrate and navigate those realms.
I mean, it's an interesting point that you raise around how people can discern the difference between what might be factual and what might be, fantasy or, some other experience. Because, what we know working with clients with a history of, of trauma and abuse, and where there has been dissociation employed as a protective strategy, and memories, experiences begin to surface to people, that whole questioning of, is this real? Am I making this up? Am I sort of like crazy? All these kinds of questions that clients can, be asking themselves, and it can be a really difficult journey to sort of like work that out without sort of like, you know, psychedelic medicines, you know, being part of it. So, you know, I think that's sort of like how you're talking about preparation is, you know, is really key here for people who are thinking about using this as a way of exploring their inner self. And
and if you don't mind me mentioning, there's can be a bit of a hierarchy of medicine. So, for example, MDMA, because it's a relational medicine and you're more embodied, you're in your body, you know, that potentially can be gentler for some people to begin their journey, as opposed to psilocybin and ayahuasca, which is more transpersonal and you know, opening you up to that larger transpersonal field. So MDMA, also San Pedro, which is a mescaline cactus, is very body based as well, very heart opening. So I guess from a trauma perspective, it's helping the client to really understand where are they at in their journey. Do they need to be focused on the relational embodied realms and their story and their trauma narrative and really making meaning and sense out of that? Or are they ready for this larger transpersonal field and the steps needed to take that awareness of the complexity and having a therapist that can really help them, you know, drop into their body, because as we know, the body knows. So they may get an image or a content, you know, but dropping deeper than that, deeper than the story, deeper than, you know, the image, and then really attuning with what does my body feel about this? What is my body saying to me? And that's really key for all of the medicines.
Some clients report experiences during or post a traumatic event, feeling that there has been a presence alongside them during that experience, and that I've had clients talk about that presence feeling like, you know, it was loving, that they felt held and protected at some level. I mean, obviously they weren't being protected at a sort of like a literal physical level, but in some kind of emotional, psychic, transpersonal level, that they were being protected during those instances. And you know, so some people might describe that presence as God or as an angel or an ancestor or spirit guide, and people use different ways of you know, naming those kinds of experiences. What are your thoughts about this type of experience, and how, as a therapist, would you respond to a client who describes this kind of experience to you, and how they may be able to harness that as part of their healing process?
So I guess when I'm working with clients, a model that's really helped me and them is, and you don't have to believe it from a spiritual sense, but even a metaphorical sense, it's really helpful to work with. So in shamanic cultures, they often talk about the lower, the middle, and the upper world. And the lower is often kind of root system. When people journey, it's often quite earth-based visions, very foundational structures. This can be pre-verbal content in the roots. It's a transpersonal field that is quite non-verbal and foundational, kind of structural images and sensations. Then we have the middle world, which is the 3D world, where we are now, our relationships, our life, our personality, our ego. And then we have the upper world, which is the transpersonal, the astral. And what people can get into a bit of a bind with is thinking that the middle world, we need to escape the middle world and we need to go to this transpersonal field, because that's where all these godheads and spiritual beings will be there. And absolutely, some people experience that, but what we know is that there's light and dark in all of those spaces. You know, they're in the pre-verbal context, there's light and dark in our 3D relational world, and as well as the astral. So we try and educate people about spiritual bypassing and managing their expectations, because even the astral transpersonal field can be painful. And there can be loving entities and angels and experiences of plant spirits, but there can also be, you know, harsh and painful experiences there as well.
Can you explain what you mean by spiritual bypassing? Spiritual
bypassing is when people chase, well, ultimately they're chasing secure attachment, often because they haven't had that stabilized in their mind and their metacognition and in their body. So if they have one good experience on a mushroom of God, or, you know, that's what they chase. They want to keep going back to ceremony to feel that love which they deserve, and it wasn't stabilized in their development. But what we know is the medicine isn't predictable. The MDMA is more predictable for love and empathy, and that's why it's been endorsed by the TGA for PTSD, because it is more reliable. But for plants like ayahuasca, San Pedro, and psilocybin and peyote, like, it's complex and multifaceted. You're in a relationship with a molecule in a plant that isn't predictable. So you may not get that love each time you return, and there can be a lot of disappointment in that for people who are seeking that secure attachment. That's why it's really important that there is a community then that can hold that secure attachment, and elders or therapists, psychotherapy, because when you travel through those realms, the lower, the middle, and the upper, you're open to it all, the light and the dark. And people really need to manage their expectations. And the people I work with are willing to engage in that relationship. They are conscious that they're entering a transpersonal field, which is both light and dark, and they're developing skills and tools on how to, you know, integrate the light and you know, work through the darker imagery, because you can't have one without the other in medicine work.
And, you know, and I guess also you can't have one without the other in our, you know, in our conscious day-to-day relationship. And of course, this is like, you know, the foundation of what not only people with trauma are, you know, dealing with, but, you know, anybody is traversing that sort of like light and dark in relationship.
When I say medicine work, I mean all of those realms. You know, we're all medicine carriers, and we're all, you know, all those fields from my perspective are intersecting anyway, you know, simultaneously.
Okay. So another question that I want to put to you is that people with trauma and abuse histories develop a heightened sense of their surroundings as part of their survival response. And, you know, we tend to sort of like call it hypervigilance, which I don't really like that word, because I think that what it has sort of like a connotation that the client is doing something wrong, is, you know, the client is sort of like damaged in some way. But, you know, we all know what we're talking about when we use that term. And it's true that this heightened state of alertness in trauma survivors, when it's not mediated, when the person is not at a point where they can learn how to regulate and calm themselves, that it can deplete the body, the emotions, and also that survivors may misread situations, that either they think that safe people in situations are dangerous, or vice versa, that people who are actually not good for them, or situations they think that they are safe. And we know that this can take quite some time for people to be able to sort of like navigate that and work through the dynamics around that. But beyond that, what I've also seen with many people with trauma histories is that they often have a heightened intuition or psychic sensibility, which might be, developed as part of their survival. And I think, all human beings have this potential. But I wonder if for some people, that trauma does have a part in developing these capabilities. What's your thoughts around that idea?
Absolutely. I think, my sense is the dark night of the soul really forces one to, in many cases, to dissolve their sense of self and collapse everything they thought they knew about the world. You get pushed into darkness, you get pushed into survival, and in that breaking down and dissolving, there appears to be an expanding into other sensations and heightened or more acutely plugged in sensations, as well as, many people through a dark night of the soul get pushed into the transpersonal field. And it can take a long time to learn how to navigate that and embody it and integrate it. And if you don't know how, we live in a culture that can gaslight these abilities and really, punish or persecute people who are tapping into these fields, because it's not really conducive with, capitalist, modern, individualistic culture. But we know that these qualities and skills and abilities are very applicable in other cultures and communities, like, as I mentioned, these lineage holding communities. It's just common. It's the norm. But in Australia, in our community, it's still, can be seen as quite taboo, and we need to do a lot to support people with elders, with ways to develop these intuitions and navigate these skills and abilities in a really grounded way.
So Lani, I know that you have been quite public about your personal experience of plant-based psychedelic medicines and healing from past trauma. And I'm just wondering whether you'd be willing to share with us something about your healing journey.
Sure. I guess there's been many phases to it, and the older I get and the more I do my work, I can narrativize it much better. So I began MDMA use at age 13, at very, very young age, for years. And I didn't realize until I became an academic in this space and professional in this space that I had chosen that medicine at that time to get through, my sexual trauma, and to feel compassion and to feel safe in the room. I didn't really like drinking alcohol when everyone was. And it was actually a very wise decision for me to make, even though I was very young and there's, potential risks at that stage. But the alternative was pretty serious for me if I hadn't. And MDMA did heal me and did get me through those teenage years. But I didn't have the metacognitive intelligence or the elders to let me know that. So there was shame. There was shame of being a drug user. Yeah. When I was a survivor, moving into, thriving on my own as a young person, just navigating that with MDMA. Then I had, 10 years off, no substances. And I reached a real pivotal point in my career as a sexual abuse therapist. I've been working with childhood sexual abuse for 15 years. And my dark night of the soul really hit really hard when I was 30, realizing we didn't have enough treatments that could hold the darkness and complexity of complex PTSD. And then I had my own 2-year challenge of existential deep despair and fear and the void, as I describe it, just a dark black hole that I was living in. And it propelled me to try everything in the mainstream. None of it worked for me. Didn't scratch the surface at all. And then I went, took myself to the jungle for ayahuasca, and profoundly changed my relationship with the mystery, with suffering, with my trauma journey. It's changed my career, obviously, now working in this space, and I'm very grateful that now MDMA and psilocybin has been approved by the TGA, because I really felt that shift in the culture where too much suffering is happening. Our treatments are not good enough, and therapy, although incredible, often takes a very long time. And there's these medicines that are embedded in the fabric of ancient cultures that are legal and thriving in other countries, and to now have Australia recognise that, I think, is pretty incredible. So for me, it's really given me just a love of life and the mystery, and just a deeper capacity to hold darkness and to see magic everywhere, to see medicine everywhere. I don't need to be in ceremony. Life is ceremony for me now. It's everywhere.
Oh, look, thank you so much for sharing that with everyone today. That's I think it takes a lot of courage to speak out about experiences, and including when they are also with experiences of medicines that have up until very recently been illegal. And I think that as a society we tend to be very condemning of drug use, rather than, as you say, like it was life-saving for you. And whilst we do know that for many people what might be lead to other problems in terms of drug use, that people do it because it helps, it works in the immediate term. But being able to use medicines safely and the right ones to assist people, I think, is going to really be transformative over over the next little while as we kind of integrate this into healing practices. So it's a really exciting time.
And if I can, I'll just say one more thing. If we can all hold that, the reality is that we have been altering our states of consciousness from the dawn of time, whether that's through drumming, prayer, trance, dance, sex, from technology to caffeine to substances. So I think we really need to accept that it is very much a human right, need, and there's shame and judgment and criticism is not going to help. What helps is education and creating these safe containers and a culture of elders that can hold people to have freedom of choice of consciousness and a sovereign mind and spirituality. The right to, my spirituality is currently illegal in Australia, but legal in many other countries. And so it's a fascinating time, because we're seeing human rights, spirituality, healthcare, public policy, all these disciplines coming together, and Australia will be very different over the coming decade. So I'm privileged to be part of it. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, look, thank you for joining us and sharing your experience and expertise.
Thank you.